I'm starting on page 801. Repeal the Jones Act, a century-old Buy American maritime law that has decimated the U.S. shipbuilding industry. Work with Congress to restore the President's Trade Promotion Authority, which will expedite the negotiation of trade agreements with the United Kingdom, Switzerland, Taiwan, the European Union, and other allies, and keep trade-unrelated provisions out of trade agreements. Restore the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution process to full strength. Create a successor to the WTO, assuming that it has been fatally wounded, that is only open to liberal democracies. This would prevent authoritarian countries like China from abusing the organization for their own ends. Adopt a multi-pronged China strategy to convince the Chinese government to reform its illiberal human rights and trade policies. Rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, whose 11 members are developing institutional trade norms in an important geopolitical region without U.S. input or involvement. Reorient the proposed Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity to focus only on trade issues, which it currently ignores in favor of progressive wish list policies. Strengthen diplomatic pressure in concert with allies against Beijing's abuses. Encourage cultural and intellectual engagement with the Chinese people, remembering that blue jeans and rock and roll helped to win the Cold War. Okay. Tariff relief. When people try something repeatedly and it still doesn't work, they should stop doing it, especially when the consequences turn out to be just what conservative economists have long predicted they would be. With tariffs, the proper reform is not only to get rid of the individual tariffs that have backfired, but also to build institutional safeguards against future abuse. We are 5 years into the biggest experiment with tariffs since the Great Depression, and the results are in. The new tariffs raise consumer prices for ordinary Americans by about $1,200 per household every year and benefit only a small number of special interests. Steel and aluminum tariffs enacted on national security grounds angered allies. Beijing made not a single substantive reform in response to 4 rounds of tariffs plus an attempted phase 1 agreement. The Biden administration has left the tariffs in place and is expanding them to pursue progressive policy goals. The first order of business for a new administration that is focused on American workers and consumers is to repeal all tariffs enacted under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 and Sections 201 and 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. The president can do this unilaterally, and Congress can do it through legislation. The second order of business requires Congress to pass legislation repealing Sections 232, 201, and 301. The U.S. Constitution places all taxing authority with Congress and none with the president. Congress used those provisions of law to delegate some of its taxing authority to the president because it was having trouble passing clean tariff legislation in the 1960s and 70s. Unless and until this constitutional question about delegation is addressed, important reforms are available to the next Congress and the next president. Congress faced a problem of collective action in the 1960s and 70s. As a whole, members generally wanted to lower tariffs, but few individual members were willing to remove tariffs that benefited special interests in their districts. Trade bills were invariably watered down through amendments and log rolling. The thinking was that the president, whose constituency is the entire nation, would be less prone to special interest pleading than members of Congress would be. So Congress delegated some of its tariff-making authority to the president in 1962 and 1974 trade legislation. Delegating tariff-making might have worked in the short run, but in the long run, it was both constitutionally dubious and ripe for abuse. That came to pass in 2018. The Section 232 to steel and aluminum tariffs evoked in 1918 against Canada, Europe, and other allies on national security grounds raised car prices by an average of $250 per vehicle and gave America the world's highest steel prices. They also harmed the construction, canned food and beverage, and other metal-using industries. While this may have benefited the steel industry itself, every steel job saved cost an average of $650,000 per year. Every steel job saved cost an average of $650,000 per year that had been taken from elsewhere in the economy. That is no way to strengthen American manufacturing. The new Federal Reserve estimated in 2019 that the Section 301 China tariffs cost the average household $831 per year, a figure that has likely increased with inflation. The new tariffs have a clear record of failure, as conservative economists almost unanimously warned would be the case. Job number one for the next administration is to return sensible trade policies and eliminate the destructive Trump-Biden tariffs. Strengthening American manufacturing. The decline of American manufacturing is a common political trope in both parties, typically invoked before a call for more government intervention. This narrative has several problems. One is that American manufacturing output is currently at an all-time high. The record was not set during World War II and not during the 1950s boom. Output did not peak when manufacturing employment peaked in 1979 or during the Reagan economic revival in the 1980s. It is actually higher now than it has ever been. American manufacturing is buoyant because each manufacturing worker's productivity is also at an all-time high. The key to prosperity is doing more with less. The next president should ignore special interests and populist ideologues who want government to do the opposite through industrial policy, trade protectionism, and other failed progressive policies. So that, an aside, the president who is selling out to the highest bidder for his campaign donations at this current point, the former president and presidential candidate, is going to ignore special interests and populist ideologues. Okay, getting back. It takes surprisingly few people to achieve America's record high manufacturing output. Currently, about 13 million people out of a workforce of more than 160 million, compared to the 1979 peak of 19.5 million people out of a workforce of 104 million. Productivity growth has freed the time and talents of millions of people for other additional uses. The belief that manufacturing has to shrink for services to grow is a zero-sum fallacy against which sensible economists often warn. It is an anathema to the optimism, hope, and confidence that are the natural birthright of conservatives. Interesting. Growing productivity enables more output of both manufacturing and services. This is why America continues to have sustained booms and record-setting real GDP despite the long-run decline in manufacturing employment. Economists distinguish between the two types of growth, extensive and intensive. Extensive growth is the Soviet and Chinese model for manufacturing. If you have more people use more resources, they will create more output. Extensive growth is doing more with more. Intensive growth is doing more with less. That is where America's superpower lies. The story of American manufacturing is one of intensive growth dating back to our agricultural origins. Conservative leaders should draw on this history to position America for continued success. With intensive growth, it is not manufacturing or services, it is manufacturing and services. Retaliatory tariffs. Raising tariffs on another country almost always invites retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. The latter tend to be directed at politically sensitive American exports. Retaliatory tariffs by both China and American allies in response to the 2018 steel tariffs were targeted primarily at American agriculture. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, these tariffs cost farmers $27 billion, with losses concentrated particularly in the heartland states. Retaliatory tariffs also targeted U.S. industries that were not protected by tariffs. Many imports became inputs into U.S. manufacturing. The motorcycle manufacturer Harley-Davidson was already facing higher production costs as domestic steel producers raised their prices to accommodate the new steel tariff. A retaliatory tariff on its motorcycles imposed by the European Union further raised its prices and hurt its export business. Harm to such innocent bystanders was another unintended, though foreseen, consequence. Federal Reserve research shows that the tariffs have cost about 75,000 manufacturing jobs while creating only about 1,000 jobs in the steel industry, not including the effects of retaliatory tariffs described above. Higher steel prices added an average of $250 to the cost of new cars and larger trucks, the vehicle of choice in rural America, which is hit even more dramatically. Trade is generally a win-win for both participants. Tariff is lose-lose-lose game, with the tariff raiser losing affordable goods, the tariff target losing exports, and the tariff raiser losing again from retaliatory tariffs. Tariffs also have an additional overlooked hidden cost. Companies redirect resources to dodge tariffs by redesigning products, switching to more expensive suppliers, using lower quality materials, and lobbying. This might be good for lawyers, but it is bad for the economy. These resources could have been used instead to make a better product more cheaply. Conservatives warned against retaliation from the beginning. It was exactly what happened after the 1930 Smoot-Harley tariffs that worsened the Great Depression. Undoing the normalization of protectionism. Inertia is one of the strongest forces in politics. Radical new policies can become the new normal very quickly and are extremely difficult to unwind if they backfire. This happened with the Trump administration's progressive turn on protectionism. The Biden administration quickly undid the Trump administration's conservative regulatory reforms, but left its progressive, self-defeating trade policies in place, in many cases even strengthening them. 2 presidential administrations is a long time in politics, and the next conservative administration will have a tough time getting tariff relief past a bureaucracy that dislikes change and special interests that will fight hard to preserve their special privileges. But given the stakes for future American prosperity, it will be worth it. Dealing with disruption. It is true that trade is disruptive, though its long-run effect on employment is approximately zero. In the short run, it will cost jobs and even depopulate towns. America's resilience depends on its ability to adjust, but successful and timely adaptation is generally spontaneous in nature. The work of human action, but not human design. Planned adjustment by governments has a much poorer track record. Context is also important to adjustment efforts. Technological change costs approximately 6 times more jobs, as does trade, though again, only in the short run. Any arrangement made against a trade's disruptive effects applies even more strongly to technological change, yet no one seriously argues for reversing the dramatic changes the internet has wrought. More than 11 million American jobs turn over through hirings, firings, retirements, layoffs, and resignations every month, and nearly 85% of all jobs turn over in the course of a year. Yet America has suffered only 4 bouts of double-digit unemployment during the past century. 2 of them, the Great Depression and the come down from the 1970s stagflation, were due to monetary mismanagement, not trade. The third, the Great Recession, was due to a financial crisis worsened by monetary management, not trade. The fourth was due to COVID-19 lockdowns, not trade. Using trade restrictions to slow this churn is a mistake for 2 reasons. 1, trade is at best a minor contributor to job churn compared to other factors like technology, changing consumer tastes, inflation, and business cycles. And 2, churn is evidence of a healthy economy. Agricultural economies have low job churn and low living standards. When people see better opportunities, they should be allowed to pursue them. To do otherwise slows economic growth, harms individual dignity, removes humanity from our policies, and can contribute to societal ills like depression, addiction, and isolation. Trade adjustment could be made easier by regulatory reforms to remove its attendant friction. These include less restrictive zoning and permit rules, occupational licensing reform, automatic sunsets for new regulations, and a presidentially appointed regulatory reduction commission that would examine the Code of Federal Regulations each year and send repeal packages to Congress that include old, obsolete, redundant, and harmful regulations. People who need help should be able to get it. Progressive trade policies help only special interests while harming the very people they are supposedly intended to help. Trade adjustment assistance. Trade adjustment assistance is a popular policy for aiding displaced workers. Though flawed, it's a bargaining tool that can potentially help to get sound trade policy adopted. A conservative administration should approach trade adjustment assistance with caution and use it as a last resort political bargaining tool and not as a first resort policy. Funding for job training programs and the like will typically find its way to labor union slush funds, left-leaning nonprofits, and other progressive causes that will not necessarily help displaced workers. A better approach to trade adjustment assistance, if it must be expanded, is direct cash payments. Not only would this prevent progressive hijacking of programs and their funding, but cash is the most flexible type of aid. It treats people as adults and lets them make their own choice about their next steps. Major life decisions should be made by individuals for themselves, not for them in Washington. How does that fit in with Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose, and LGBTQ plus people and their freedoms, et cetera, et cetera? This boggles my mind. Trade adjustment assistance should treat workers who lose their jobs to international trade the same as workers who lose their job for any other reason are treated. While that may not necessarily come to pass, that may not likely come to pass in the near future, steps in that direction are possible. Technological change displaces 6 times as many workers as trade displaces, yet workers displaced by technology get no special treatment, nor should they. Unemployment remains low because it grows alongside population, and real wages continue to rise over time. Trade displaced workers should be eligible for the same benefits for which anyone else is eligible, no more, no less. Okay, and let's end at that point.